NCR Corporation is a leader in omnichannel solutions, turning everyday interactions with businesses into exceptional experiences. With its software, hardware, and portfolio of services, NCR enables nearly 700 million transactions daily across financial, retail, hospitality, travel, telecom, and technology industries. NCR solutions run the everyday transactions that make your life easier. NCR is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, with about 30,000 employees and does business in 180 countries.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction. My name is Howie Choset. People generally call me Howie. Right now, I'm in a kind of a busy time in my career. It's a little unfortunate in that there's only so much time in the day. My first job is a professor of robotics at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm just curious, how many of you ever heard of Carnegie Mellon? Well, that's good. It's a world class. It's a great place. It's well endowed for computer science, drama, engineering, now business and finance. It's a special place, and one of the reasons why I'm so proud of it, of the top 10 universities in the United States, it's the newest. Actually, Carnegie Mellon formed in 1967, and although we're a year late, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. One thing that's also great about Carnegie Mellon is that the students we attract and the disposition that the administration has, it's one where we can actually start lots of companies. So we work in our labs, we get technology developed, students get their degrees, but they want to take it one step further, and they want to be able to control their future. So instead of going off and getting a job, they go out and start a company. And with my students, I've been able to start 3 companies so far. One is a medical device company, another is a modular robot company, and the last one is an autonomous guided vehicle company. We're actually going to start our 4th one. We invented a new type of crutches for those of you who get hurt. The other thing that I have to do all day is work on this manufacturing center. So President Obama issued 14 manufacturing centers. The idea is that we want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, make manufacturing a first-class enterprise here in America. And the other 13 each have their own specialties, light materials, additive manufacturing, textiles, and so forth. The one for which I'm the CTO is dedicated to robotics. So I guess for the parents who understand this, I'm not 50-50. I'm really like 80-80 or 90-90. But it's good because I'm surrounded by a lot of great people. So you see the word robot in my title and everything we've spoken about. And I'm just curious, who here really thinks they know what a robot is? So we have one person, two, not too many. It's surprising. A lot of people, when they think of robot, this is what they think of. And it's one of these 2 robots. And it really tells what kind of person you are if you're thinking of C-3PO or the Terminator. And the thing is, these are anthropomorphic, human-like forms. And the animal kingdom is full of successes where beings exist. One of them is a snake. So my research group, we specialize on these snake robots. Pretty much if you imagine metal, a snake in your head converted to metal, that's what a snake looks like. And what's cool about these robots is that they can perform all sorts of tasks. They can perform all sorts of acrobats that robots of a comparable size cannot. And they inspire a lot of cool technological development, but also theoretical development as well. And there are real-world applications that my group is involved in. So one of them is search and rescue. The idea is, can we provide a tool that we can give to rescue workers so the rescue worker can better do his job? We want to be able to extend the sensory reach of a rescue worker so he doesn't have to go into this collapsed building. So we don't have to perhaps put the victims at a little more risk because somebody's bungling around in this already fragile environment. I think a lot of you know that there was this earthquake in Mexico City last year, and my team went down with our robots to assist the Mexican Red Cross to look for survivors. So we didn't find anybody. It's sad. We cleared some rooms where we determined there was no one there. But you just got to look at how desperate a situation these people are in. This is such an unstructured, they're using hacksaws to cut rebar out of the cement. This is a very desperate time. You have 48 hours just to locate people. After those first 2 days, the odds of someone surviving one of these collapses it's really next to nothing. So just being able to get in there and say, hey, help is on the way is significant. Another application that we've been working on is inspection in nuclear power plants. So here's a power plant in Austria that wasn't turned on. It was completed, and the Austrians decided not to turn it on. And we're using it as a test facility to figure out where our robots can go. So what you're seeing is our robots going into this facility for the first time. Here, we're in this drum. It looks like it's underwater because it's like little floaters going around, but really that's air. It hasn't been disturbed in 30 years. The models, those CAD models that you're seeing, those are models that we created after the robot went into the environment. In other words, we were able to recreate what the scene was. And again, you can understand why that's important for forensics afterwards. Pretty soon you'll see we got to a bolt that we left behind. Another application that was fun was archaeology. Again, archaeology is like search and rescue, except there's really no rush because everyone's been dead for like 5,000 years, so we're not going to change anything anyway. And what we had here is if you ever have an opportunity to go to Egypt, in between the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid is a causeway that you walk on, and halfway between that causeway, there's an entrance that goes 37 meters underground, and that's the entrance. And they don't know why the Egyptians dug that, but it goes into a room maybe half the size of this room that's filled with water, and it's a sarcophagus with a Khafre. He's the pharaoh after whom one of the pyramids is named. And there's little passageways that go beyond that area, and we sent our robots in to go look to see where things can go. We ran out of time, so we went as far as we could and came back. We were supposed to go next year, but there was a revolution in Egypt, so this was a few years ago, so it hasn't been safe to go back yet. But we hope to. So in all these applications that we discussed, in essence, what we're doing is minimally invasive surgery. Okay. Have any of you had like a knee operation or your gallbladder removed yet? No? No one? Oh, it's a healthy group. So what I'm going to show you, by the way, I already glanced at it. It's blood and gore. You all had lunch a while ago, so it'll be okay. But for those of you who've had your heart operated on already, what you want to do is you want to avoid a big incision, getting this bone cracked open. What you'd rather have is the procedure done through small openings. And the reason for this is that it hurts a lot less. It's a significant pain reduction. It's good for the patient. The other thing, believe it or not, is it's cheaper. If you're not cutting someone open, it's significantly less expense. But the thing that I find exciting about the potential for minimally invasive surgery is that it provides an opportunity for people to both deliver medical care that they otherwise would not be able to, and for people to receive medical care that they otherwise would not get. Because now you don't need to be in a hospital. You don't need a center of medical excellence. The problem with minimally invasive surgery is today we're limited to two kinds of tools. Rigid laparoscope, they can access points within line of sight of where the incision's made, or an endoscope, it's flexible, but they buckle easily. So you can only go really in your intestines, what we call the luminal tracts. A small snake robot inherits the benefits of both. It's flexible and rigid at the same time. So with this, this is where it gets a little gory. With this, we can now do some heart operations. So this is a pig. I should acknowledge my collaborator, Marco Zanotti. And what we're doing is a heart operation. We're doing minimally invasive heart surgery. So the robot goes in through its subxiphoid process. And what we're going to do now is we're going to drive around the heart to deliver some therapy. So your pericardium is transparent. Actually, all mammals' pericardiums are transparent. The robot is sailing in between the beating heart and the sac, the pericardium. So we're looking through the pericardium into the robot to perform this an ablation procedure on the left atrial appendage. Now, this is not minimally invasive surgery because we opened the pig so you can look what's going on. really, we'll show an example of this. But before I go on, I want to acknowledge that we were able to start a company. It's called Med Robotics. And if you look at the difference, on the left part of your screen, you see there's the robot that we built at Carnegie Mellon. We used wood. We had a Microsoft Game Boy joystick. And on the right, we have this, totally, sterile, if I can say, sleek-looking robot that does the surgeries. And we had our first in-human procedure. In this procedure here, what you're seeing is the live X-ray of the robot driving around this woman's heart. And then the image on the upper left is the vantage point from the robot. It's the camera. So the heart is the pink thing on the bottom. What's white on top, those are the lungs. So this is one of the few non-European, non-smoking Europeans. And yeah, don't smoke. And your pericardium is transparent, so you're looking through the clear pericardium into the lungs. And we were able to perform this operation on her for the first time. It was our first time we were trying it. And we were able to complete the procedure in 4.5 hours. She went home the next day. She didn't get the sternotomy. It would have taken her 14 days to recover from that, in the hospital, to recover from that incision. Instead, she had a 15-millimeter incision and went home. I'm proud to say that this robot has cleared the FDA. It's actually the first medical robot to clear the FDA with the word medical robot. So in the eyes of the FDA, I am the first inventor of the medical robot, but that's not true. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It's not true. Russ Taylor and others deserve that credit. But again, we're in DC, so you should be thanking the FDA, not me. This is one of the first teams to operate. About 2 months ago in Australia, a physician pulled a 6-centimeter, I want to stress, centimeter, tumor out of this person's mouth, out of her throat. Okay, so that person would have had a giant incision, jaw broken, and radiation, and instead got something that's as bad as getting your tonsils removed. Okay, so this robot's operated on hundreds of people, and a handful, saved lives. So the question we have to ask ourselves, or a question we get a lot, is this biologically inspired? Do we think about biology and copy? And a funny thing happened is, I started working with my biologist friends, and we're doing the opposite. Now, we're not inspiring biology. The snakes obviously figured this stuff out a long time ago. But through our investigation of how to make the robots work, we're now developing new theories on how biological systems work. And it's kind of an interesting reverse illumination. But in all fairness, we're also learning from the real snakes to make the robots work better. They're helping too. If you looked at these robots, they're modular. And we're spending quite a bit of time trying to make modular systems. And the reason why you want to build something modular is you can now really focus development on capability once your interfaces are figured out. But the other reason is now we can build other kinds of robots. So we have this, it's not a spider. People think it is because it's sprawled, but spiders have 8 legs. So we have this nice robot that we're able to crawl over things and do all sorts of other cool robotic acrobats because we focused on this modularity aspect really nicely. So you're probably wondering at this point, what does this have to do with manufacturing? And it's a fair question to ask. You see, with industrial robots, it takes forever to install them. You buy a robot, it takes months upon months just to get them into the system. The other thing is, these robots are not very good. They're inflexible. Usually we adapt the process to the robot, not the robot to the process. Isn't that terrible? That we're slaves to the robots? And then finally, the cost to integrate these robots is high. When you buy your industrial robot, you spend 5 times the cost, by 4 to 5 times the cost, just installing the robot. Now, if you go back to the story of modularity, you start to think for a little bit, hey, with good modular components, we can build a customized robot every time. So the robot is now adapted to the process. And because we spent so much effort thinking about modularity from our snake robots, we build these modular chunks, we can now build these robots very quickly because it's almost as if we're building Lego, playing with Lego. Now, Lego doesn't have all the electronics and the computers inside of it, and that's the magic behind what we've been able to do. Get all that thinking, the intelligence encoded very nicely. And finally, once you get to modular solutions, the opportunity for lower costs go down. So this is a future of manufacturing where we're going to have customized, low cost, and more applicable manufacturing robots. And that's what it has to do with manufacturing. Now, of course, we can build other kinds of robots. This is a self-balancing system. His name is Igor. By the way, its predecessor, people spent 5-6 years just trying to build this robot. It took our guys a week. This is a self-balancing robot. It's really hard to program. So I want to close talking about manufacturing. Because of this interest that my group has developed in building robots fast, we were asked to help put together this institute called the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute. I'm the CTO of it, and we have a nice cadre of people. It's $80 million from the federal government. We have about $270 million committed from industry, so $250 million total. 170, sorry, 250 total. And it's over 5 years. It's based in Pittsburgh. And our goal is to transform American manufacturing through technological innovation and education. I have to stress that and education. We want to be able to educate people so they can go and work with these robots. We want to educate these people so they can fix, repair these robots. And I think for most of you in the audience, we want to educate them so they can build and design these robots. If we can make it so manufacturing is as simple as downloading an app on your iPhone or playing with iDraw, something like that, that's when all the creativity, that's where the real value added is going to come from. And I think it's up to us to figure out how to carry that out. Our mission, our objectives, are to lower the costs so small companies can embrace manufacturing. We also want to make it more, make the American worker, we want to empower the American worker to be more cost competitive with workers from other countries. We also want to help small companies be able to embrace robotics. Right now, they don't have the education to do that. And then finally, this is one people don't realize, is that robotics is necessary for our national security. First, manufacturing is important for a stable for national security by itself, but our airplanes, our military equipment is going to be built by robots. And right now, they're not built by American robots. And one can imagine a scenario where a foreign-built robot building American equipment could cause some trouble. Here are the industries that we're looking at so far. Half the robots right now are in the automotive industry, so electronics, automotive, aerospace is where 75% of the robots will probably be by 2020. But there's new industries that we're going into. And they're all kind of about manipulating soft stuff. Believe it or not, the food industry is ripe for automation. Textiles, if we can automate textiles and bring that back to the United States, it'll just be amazing as to what we can do. The amount of jobs we'll be able to create is just amazing. In the end, what this institute is about is technological development. And our job in this institute is to translate the industry needs to these technological advances. And that's what we're trying to do with these robots. We want to make them more versatile, flexible, so you can deploy them, cost-effective, work with people, also be safe to foreign attacks. So I'm supposed to close the talk with advice to students. And I feel kind of stupid giving students who are at a STEM event advice on how to do well in school, because if you are here, you're probably already doing well in school. So, and if you're here, you probably are working hard. Working hard is so important. It's grit. It's just so important. When you're struggling and you think you want to give up, it's not your smarts that are going to carry you through. It's going to be your determination. But work smart. Also, I like Pittsburgh. And again, I have to encourage you all, go out and make as much stuff as you can do. Tinker, tinker, tinker. OK, that's all. Thank you.